Hello, how are you? And welcome to another episode of Genealogy Quick Start. We all have transitions in our life, and you guys are going to you are witnessing a transition for me. I don't know why it is that Civil War pension packets and military records are just so personal to me. But just this year, I transitioned from one military specialist that I've had for, let's say, over a decade to our special guest here today, Brian Reinhardt. And he has made it such a simple thing. And I'm going to tell you all about Brian during the show. We are so honored to have him here today. And he actually kind of said we overdid the Civil War a little bit. So he wasn't going to talk about the Civil War, but that's okay. We can maneuver to other military conflicts. And so today, Brian is going to dig into his other military specialty, and he's going to talk about digging up War of 1812 bounty land, which I'm pretty excited about. I have a War of 1812 sailor that I'm pretty interested in. And so I'm interested in any tips that Brian could give me on researching him. And also, of course, Jim and Michael, they always come up with some amazing things. And today it is called Sleuthing compiled and printed sources. Yes, we always want those documents, documents, documents. Give me those documents. But these sources were created to help us. And so they are going to share some tips on how to use those sources. So you know what to do. Let us know out there where you are. Okay. We'd love to know where you are. And if you are a member of a genealogy group, we want to know about it. You have to tell us because there could be someone who wants to join. So, without further ado, let me bring on these guys, they are with me all the time. And I don't know if I tell you how much I actually appreciate you, Jim Beidler, columnist and editor. How are you today?
I am great, Lady Chamel.
And genealogy tip of the day. I think he's actually three tips of the day. I've told him this. I mean, Michael, how many tips of the day are you exactly?
That's requires security clearance that you don't have. Even though you are Queen Chamel, you just don't have that security clearance. It's just
I,
So,
whatever I feel like saying.
I think he's three tips to the wind. So
That's a whole separate issue.
so do you guys, Brian's coming on. He actually said we were kind of like Civil War whores, like we kind of overdid it. Like that's what he didn't say that, but that's what I was feeling. Like, we were overdoing it. But you guys, I have this guy in Lawnside who was on the USS Constitution. Do you guys have any War of 1812 sailors or soldiers or any bounty land?
I have at least two War of 1812 soldiers. I was trying to get into the War of 1812 Lineage Society, and I found this guy who was a corporal, and in the published Pennsylvania archives, his proof of service. I went to get his pension and bounty land. I got this big file. Just this back in the days when you had to photocopy it yourself, all that. So I'm going back on the train, and I realized this was his son, namesake son, trying to impersonate him. Wasn't going to help me get into that wage society. But fortunately, I had another one who was a sergeant, so I went up a rank. And Peter Etchberger got me into the General Society War of 1812. So
Go, Peter. How about you, Michael? Any War of 1812 or any bounty land?
I have one War of 1812 ancestor, which I think is actually pretty good considering the small fraction of me that was here in the U.S. in 1812. He did get bounty land. He did not receive it because he never left Indiana after he got back from the war. Uh, but he did serve. He served from Kentucky. Actually, he was discharged. It's kind of cool because his discharge was in Ontario in March, and he had to probably take a horse or on foot from Ontario, Southern Ontario, down to Fleming County, Kentucky, where he was where he was from. So that was pretty cool.
What
Pretty
was that?
darn.
Was that because he was part of the Canadian expedition and they really discharged him up there? Or?
He was his discharge paper indicates he was discharged in Canada. Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
And,
Very interesting. Very interesting. Do you guys out there, whether you are watching live or in recording, do you have any War of 1812 soldiers or sailors and any bounty land? Let's take a look. Is my internet like totally awful? Am I freezing as much as it appears to me? No?
Just a little bit.
All right, let's see who we have here. Oh my goodness, Gary Franklin is on top again. Hello, Gary from Toledo. Hello, Meg from Dresden, Tennessee. We love Tennessee. That's where J. Mark Lowe is. Hello, Donna from Raleigh, North Carolina. That is my dream space. That is like Disney something for genealogy at UNC and all over there, the Triangle. Who else do we have here? Hello, Holly from, where's Holly? Carnation. Love that. Hi, Tina from Port Neches. This must be Brian's people. Brian brought his people today.
He
Hello,
did.
Kathy Wiseman from Ohio. We have Yolanda from Florida. Phyllis is here looking for Brian. Yay, Brian. Hello, Carolyn from Northern New York. We love New York and New Jersey. Hello, Michelle from Omaha, and Lori from Dayton, Ohio. You know I love Ohio. Judy from Chicagoland. Hi. Hello, Doll. How are you in Bensalem, PA? Hello, Katie from HSP. Yes, Gary has his genealogy junkie groups here. We have AUGS, we have AAGS in Cleveland, and of course, AAGHS in Chicago. We have Anne from Illinois. Very nice here. Rebecca, how are you from Sacramento? Hi, Donna. These must be all military people. So nice to have you. Hi, Cindy. Where are we with time? We're doing okay. I might have to say hi to some of you guys later. Hello, KC from Wyoming and Idaho. I think this is a first. This is a first. You're a first, KC. Hello, Donna. We said hello to Donna. She said Brian's looking up stuff for him. Bountyland. Yes, yes, yes. Hi, John from Indianapolis. I love Indy. When I went to Indy, they treated me like I was Michelle Obama. So I'm going to go back. Hi, Kate Bobbitt, another Ohioan. All right. All of you, we are so happy to have you here. If I get a chance, I will say hi to you personally. But we want to get started with the show. We want to make sure we have time. So Jim and Michael came up with this really cool quick start because we're always told, go to the record. You got to get the record. You got to get the record, right? But today we're going to talk about a great tool, which is sleuthing compiled and printed sources. So, guys, why do you think this is a good idea?
Well, I kind of think that a lot of genealogists swing back and forth as far as their use of so-called secondary sources. A lot of people, it's their first exposure to book genealogy. If they don't keep it entirely on the internet, and then when they learn how many errors there are in these things, then they might start deciding they don't want to go near it, near those sources, and instead, what they should be doing is analyzing these sources and using them not as a substitute for primary information, but as a guidepost. At least that's my take on it.
How you feel about that, Michael?
I would have a similar approach to Jim. I use them as a clue. Sometimes with the printed sources, depending upon what they are, they may transcribe records that are no longer extant. And if that's the case, the printed source may be the only one that you have. Particularly compilations of tombstones, if they were done in the 30s or the 40s, could fall into that category. Some of those stones just may no longer be there, so you may be reliant on that transcription made at that point in time.
Fantastic. Let's get going with sleuthing. compiled and printed sources. So step one, of course, is to click on step one. Understand levels of evidence. Now, this is a giant step, actually. I mean, you know, how do we understand levels of evidence?
I guess
What do
I'm
you
going to
mean
answer
by
that
this?
because I'm
You're highlighted, buddy.
I'm highlighted. I'm going to have to understand that. When we're talking about understanding levels of evidence, is it we talk about sources that are original, are the original document, compiled sources, transcript derivative sources, if you will, are transcribed from those original sources. The quality of that transcription, if it's a verbatim transcription, varies from one individual to another. The quality of extracts or abstracts varies from one individual to another. Of course, we would lend a little more credence to the original record than we would a compiled record or a derivative that's a transcription of that document. But it really depends on the individual and how much concern they have for being very precise and tedious in their transcription, so it renders it as accurately as possible. Sometimes you can get a feel for how accurately they do that. Other times it's kind of hard on the surface to know just how good of a job they are doing with that.
Yeah, and they're really, we're highlighting the uses of these, but underlying this is always, wherever possible, that where it still does exist, that original source of information, you want to get back to it. Because an example that I didn't use tonight, because it was a little bit off the central theme, was a book of newspaper abstracts that was done by the guy who was the seminal newspaper historian of his county. And I looked at this newspaper abstract. It was an obituary from 1807. That was, just a few words. But at the time, that's what most obituaries were. They were really just a quick notice of death. And I kind of put it out in my mind. I thought, well, that's all it's going to say. Well, years later, I decided to do it right, and truth be known, it was during the pandemic, and I had nothing else to do, so I queried the state library of Pennsylvania and said, hey, do you have this? I think you have this original newspaper. Could you satisfy me get a full copy of it? And I figured it was going to be this one line long, and at least I would have that in. It was a German language newspaper, and be in Fruchter font and all that. Well, they come back and no, it's not one line. It's a whole freaking paragraph. It confirms where he was buried, who buried him, all this extra information that was uncommon for the time. So, always, we're going to suggest some strategies here for, using what you have, but always try to go back to that original if it still exists.
And the one thing to remember about a lot of these records, particularly if they're transcriptions or extracts from original records, these published materials were finding aids created before this thing called the internet, I think it was, before a lot of these things were available to us online. And so one way to find some things that weren't indexed or whatever, instead of doing a page by page search, was to search these transcriptions, like the example that Jim mentioned of the newspaper abstracts.
How many of you still have all those CDs, like all those indexes of births and stuff? Like, what do I do with those things? Should I just seriously throw them away and save some space for something? Like,
That's a whole separate quick start, but the answer to that could very well be yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right, let's move on to step two. We understand evidence. Go to the original. These are just pointers, finding aids, if you want to say. Step two is to pick a printed or compiled source. So where are the best places for printed and compiled sources?
I believe they're called libraries, maybe would be the word for that. A lot of things have been digitized, so especially out of copyright materials that are older, you can access in that format. But for things that are still in copyright or they haven't been digitally reproduced, you're gonna have to leave the home and go to library and access them there for the most part, in historical societies and things of that type as well.
Yes, so historical society libraries and who was the number one place? Library of Congress. Everybody needs to just go to Library of Congress and like pull up in the genealogy area, which is kind of like back in this room, but it's near these really cool chairs, and they'll let you go sit there and just chill out. But you need a jacket. It's actually freezing back there, just so
You did say chill out. Okay.
but all right. So you pick your printed and compiled sources. Historical societies are great for this. Step 3 is then to which records were included in the source. So, okay, so they're different. I thought like, so deeds versus births versus.
Well, and which records were extant, even if it's deeds, were there volumes that were missing? Was there some record loss for one reason or another? But read the preface, because no matter what you're looking at, the preface, if there were issues in terms of legibility or what's available, the preface ideally should address those concerns and make you aware of any gaps that were encountered when they compiled the material.
And in the case of family surname histories, are they tracing all descendants of a particular couple? Do they have an appendix that has allied lines? Do they carry them all the way down to the present, or do they just say have the first 4 generations from a particular couple? And as Michael was saying, all of those things should be in the preface or introductory information, or if they're kind of semi-linear, it'll be forward instead of forward. But
So the one thing, so yeah, I would definitely, to figure out what's in there, is to read the beginning and how they describe it. But there's one thing that they're probably not going to say, and this happened to me. I got the book, Barber County marriage records from like the beginning to 1920, and some of my people were in there, and some of them weren't. But when I went to the original source, which was at the county courthouse or at the state archives, anybody who had a little C next to them, this lady decided they didn't belong in her book. So this is something that you might not notice in the forward. They might not say, hey, we left the C's out, right? So pay attention and don't think just because your people aren't in there that, they didn't get married. Go to the original source.
And once again, that's why you go to the originals to see. Yeah, what a shame. Yeah.
All right, so step 3. Let's move on to step 4. How much did they extract? And we have some examples that we're going to show you. Do you want to show the examples now? Are you guys ready for that? Or you want to talk about step 4?
Michael, I defer to your wisdom here.
All right, so how much did they extract?
It's going to be a short difference. How much did they extract? And some of that hopefully would be addressed in the preface. It might not be, and you might have to look at some originals and see what they actually extracted. If I'm thinking about land records in some states, when they would do extracts, they would leave out the meets and bounds description with the angles and the measurements. Sometimes they would, they're obviously going to include the buyer and the seller and the date and how much it was worth and the total acreage and the witnesses, but they might include the meets and bounds description. They might only include that parts of it that had names of actual neighbors and not mention the trees and the rocks and the other things. And there might be, and sometimes if there's extra information, because deeds are one of those things that sometimes, depending upon the situation, can contain some random things. They might have extracted those. They might not have extracted those, because sometimes it falls on, did the extractor think that was interesting or genealogically relevant? And if you're not familiar with the family, you don't always know what truly is genealogically relevant and what's not. It could be some really innocuous thing that in your family or your situation could be a big deal.
Yep. There's a list of cemetery tombstone inscriptions for a key church of mine, where I was going through the list and I'm thinking, what in the heck? Because I didn't read the preface. knucklehead. And I'm like, why, how are these selected? Why are, these people who I know in the cemetery aren't included, and blah, blah, blah. Well, it was only people born before 1800. I guess they figured the later ones had more legible stones, and they were trying to preserve the oldest, not necessarily the oldest stones, but the stones of the oldest people. Yeah.
And one thing with like what Michael was saying, they don't extract necessarily all the stuff from the deed. Same thing with the wills, right? I don't know if I told you guys about the Quaker guy who came to me in a panic because he had the deed, he had the will of his ancestor, right? From an abstract in a book. And he said this man wrote a book that said his ancestor had enslaved people. And he doesn't, how does he know this? So I was like, okay. I went and got the original will. There they were. So these people chose not to include the enslaved people and possibly other, because they were just property. They didn't necessarily include all the property. All right. So let's see what step 5 is, which is to make a copy with complete references. So let's take a look at you guys' examples. I like your examples. What do we have?
Yeah. Good. This is my triumph and my shame. I did.
Let's make it bigger. Hold on. Let's make it bigger.
I did this book on the Lebanon County Dobb family. I was still pretty much of a greenhorn genealogist, and for most of it, I only included very general sources for each child of the immigrant, because I traced all the descendants, or all the descendants I could find of one immigrant couple. For each of their 9 children, I did list every source and where you could get it, but I didn't follow through doing that. Everything else, much to my chagrin. Yeah. And then this is a book that I had absolutely nothing to do with. But I would be proud if I did. And this is on the Brooke family in what's now Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. And this one is excellently done. And then this is a third example. This is one that kind of the woman just kind of vomited everything onto the page.
I love vomit.
Well, yeah, it does have sources. That's a good thing. I don't think she really necessarily graded the quality of those sources. She just kind of put them all out there. But better that than what I did in that original.
I'm reading that phrase. Where it says, if you say Nathaniel real Dutchy, it sounds like Samuel. But that was on the previous slide. I wasn't listening to what you were saying. I was reading some of the text, so that's my fault.
And this is all her stuff. This is how she did it.
Yeah.
Very detailed.
Yeah, it's kind of like a work in process.
Is this the guy's stuff again?
This is back to Brooke. Yeah, this is back to Brooke, and gives you the beginning of his end notes for each chapter. And they've got all the pages. They've got all the. He did an excellent job.
This is the gold standard, I would say.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. And that would be this is probably the silver standard, because I wasn't able to photocopy it well enough.
We won't talk about this. I forgot to move that out. I love this cover, Michael.
Yeah, this is a transcription of Baltimore County deed records. One volume went from 1659 to 1737. I still don't quite have that figured out there, but there's a big gap in it. I think they just used the book for a while and then went back to using it 40 years later or something like that. But when I make copies out of these materials for later use, copy the title page like I did. I copied the entry here. These the one entry on top, the one for Louis DeMoss. That was the one I really had an interest in. That's my umpteenth great grandfather who's giving a horse to this guy. And then I was really in a hurry at first and wasn't paying attention. There's no page numbers in this. There's page numbers to the book, but the page of the deed book from which this was taken is not given. And I wanted to get the original, just like we've kind of talked about. And so I took this copy and went right on my merry way and looked at the other references and went to the next book. And when I went back, and this is why you don't want to get in a huge hurry, I wasn't thinking as well as I should have been, because I realized I had no page number. I also discovered there were several
Yeah.
different, this book of transcriptions wasn't just one volume. There were several volumes in this book that had been transcribed.
Okay.
So I
Yes.
didn't
Oh
know
my
which book
goodness.
it came from. And so before I could find it, I had to go back later than I can next day when I was still there and photograph or take a picture of the table of contents, because then when I had the table of contents, I knew which specific volume this first entry here with the
Yes.
horse came from.
Yeah, I like to do the cover, the table of contents,
Right.
and the
So you
page.
don't
Yeah.
want to forget everything. And the other thing is you want to make sure you capture everything when you take pictures of this, because if I just take this, that doesn't tell me
Nada.
anything, because my goal was, like we mentioned, to get the original. So you want to make sure there's a table of contents, and
I
sometimes
put
the
it out of
table of
order. I'm sorry.
that's okay, because well, that's how I did it, so it's appropriate. um, but you want to make sure you've captured all the information to help you find that item later. I also copied the preface, which had a little bit more information in it as well about the records and the process that was used to extract the information.
And if you're lucky, you can just take this information and go write the family search. That's what I usually do.
That is exactly what I did. The Liebers kind of threw me off. I don't know why they just didn't call them book and volume, but that's the story for another day. This is another one, also from Maryland. This is a parish register, and you can see my finger there, which makes it authentic. And then I copied part of the preface. I'm hoping that's what comes up next. There's an image of part of the preface, and this is good information because it indicates where the individual got the information when they compiled it. They used the original records at what was then called the Maryland Historical Society. In addition to using the original records, they also used a transcription done, I think it was in the 1930s, by a woman named Lucy Harris. But I still want to go look at the original, because when you look at the next image, I'm not really sure what was, oops, it isn't there. It shows a couple that had one child in 1792, 3 children in 1801, and 3 children in 1803. Kind of violating some laws of biology there. And I'm not really sure what's going on with the transcript. And again, we can laugh about the transcription, but the transcriber's job is to transcribe it exactly as it is written,
Yes.
not to fix it. I want to go back and see if I can get an image of it, and then see if I can kind of get a better feel for I think 2 families have been merged into one entry. That doesn't explain the large gap in the burst, but that's something I've got to do later. But I want to copy it exactly it was in that book. But that was an entry that is really just begging me to go back and get the original if I can, and see if I can figure it out.
Yes. So I was trying to see if we had any. We have so many comments here. I'm trying to see who was talking about bounty land. So Michael and Jim, we are going out and looking for sources compiled. Are you creating any compiled sources? Do you abstract deeds, or have you done that in the past? And you guys out there watching, do you abstract your deeds or wills and create lists and share with people?
I abstracted declarations of intent for naturalization years ago in the county where I'm from. I did see Lori's comment about those may be baptisms rather than births. I kind of wondered that for a minute, but there are others where it's indicated it was a baptism. They make the note some are baptism, and the others are all their birth. So I'm really not certain just what's going on there, because that was my original thought too.
Right. All right. So let us go through the steps so we can get to our special guests. Our steps for this wonderful. Thank you, Jim and Michael, for sleuthing compiled and printed sources. This is just really fun to do. You should see all the sources for your counties. Step 1, understand levels of evidence. Step 2, pick a printed or compiled source. Step 3, which records are included in the source. Remember my example. Step 4, how much did they extract? And step 5, make a copy of the compiled with complete references, like Michael's example. Which book did this come from? So thank you so much for this quick start, and we'll move on to our next one. See you
Good
guys.
deal.
All righty. Let's get started with our next episode. Give me 1 second. I am so excited to have you guys here today. Brian wins. I told Brian he wins the gold star for publicity, and now he wins the gold star like he brought his people here with him today. Brian, thank you so much. He's been, how's the numbers, Shabelle? How's the numbers? Freaking incredible. Let's bring him on. You guys aren't here for me. You're here to support military specialist Brian Rhinehart. How are you, Brian? We got to have you on the month. This is incredible.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I was looking at the comments. I'm seeing a lot of familiar names, so thanks for showing up.
Brian, these are your people, okay?
They're my people. Thanks for showing up. Yes.
So, Brian, first of all, I want to say, it was serious when Jonathan had me hook up with you. And I want to tell you that it was just such a pleasure. Your setup for how you handle intake is just so streamlined. It's simple, and you get back to us just very quickly. So big, civilwarrecords.com. Definitely go and check it out. So, Brian, we ask all of our special guests to tell us your genealogy origin story. How did you get started, and when did you know that you were hooked?
Yeah, I knew I was hooked within probably 2 hours of starting this, because it was November 1999. I was supposed to be writing a college paper, and I'm really good about finding things to distract me when I'm supposed to be doing other important work. So I heard about this website called ancestry.com. Maybe you've heard of it. Back in 1999, it was not extremely well known, but I went on there and put a family name in there. Within like an hour, I was back to the 1800s on that line. And I thought it was amazing to realize that my great grandmother actually had parents. It never really occurred to me until then. And then the other moment, I have two. The other one that kind of a wow moment, I watched the series 2006 African American Lives, Henry Louis Gates. It was a precursor to the celebrity genealogy shows. And it was a whole series of like 4 episodes. And I remember watching that and just sitting there thinking, this is what I want to do. I want to do that someday. So that's when it went from a hobby to like, this is what I want to do. So I'm glad I'm able to do that now.
That is amazing, Brian. Welcome, welcome. I'm so glad that you did that, and that was an amazing series. And so we're very grateful for the awareness and spotlight that they put on genealogy for the rest of the world. Because I was on the street. We do this thing called street genealogy, and so people come up and we help them out. And someone told us, you know what? You're teaching people, you guys should create a group where you do research for people and you go get the records for them. I'm like, really? That would be an amazing.
Why didn't I think of that, right?
So, Brian, let's get started with your quick start. And I do appreciate you expanding us, because we do the Civil War quite a bit. So yeah, thank you. So today you're going to talk about digging up War of 1812 bounty land. So I hear bounty land all the time, and you said this is different. So talk to us about why, this is so different than others.
Different than what? Like pension funds and all that?
Like bounty land. Like we hear about bounty land. Like was there bounty land given at other times besides War of 1812?
There was. Bounty land actually stopped at the Civil War. But Revolutionary War gave bounty land, 1812, Mexican War, a lot of the Indian wars. They could also earn bounty land, but it stopped at the Civil War.
Okay. And we're going to just focus on 1812.
Yeah.
All right. So let's look at step 1 for your quick start. Know the laws.
Yes, definitely. And I want to say before I start, the name of your show is Genealogy Quick Start. Emphasis on quick. I could probably talk about this for like an hour, but I have like 20 minutes. So this is going to be quick in order to give you a quick start on how to find your War of 1812 bounty land. So we're going to live up to the title of your show today. So as far as knowing the laws, I always believe that it's important to know the context of these records that you're looking at, to know how and why they were created, when they were created. If you understand these bounty land laws, you're going to be able to make sense of what you're looking at in these records, understand why it took until the 1850s that a lot of this bounty land got issued. Why did your ancestor get 2 different allotments of bounty land? If you know the laws, it's going to make a lot more sense. So first thing I want to say is there were multiple bounty land acts that were passed. We're going to be focusing on the 2 that you're going to be able to find most of your War of 1812 soldiers on, though. I could talk a lot longer about all the acts, but we're just going to focus on 2 main ones today. All right. So do you have my images ready to go? There we go.
Do.
All right. So the first bounty land act that we're going to be talking about was from 1850. This was 35 years after the war was over. The war was long over, and the government decided they wanted to reward these soldiers for the service they had done. One key thing to realize about War of 1812 bounty land is it was almost always given in 40-acre increments.
And a mule? Did they get a mule? Is this how this all started, Brian?
I don't know that they got a mule. I've never seen that in the paperwork. Maybe someday I'll find that. But it was almost always given in 40-acre increments, as opposed to the Revolutionary War that was increments of 50, 100. If you find an allotment of like 100 acres, you're probably looking at Revolutionary War bounty land, not War of 1812. Okay. If you find something for 80 acres, you're probably looking at bounty land that was given under one of these bounty land acts here. So that's an easy way to tell the difference. Okay. The amount of bounty land you got at first was dependent on how long you served in the military. At the minimum, you had to serve 30 days. Under this act, if you served at least 30 days, you could get 40 acres of bounty land. That's not too bad of a trade-off right there.
That's pretty nice.
1 month of time, you get 40 acres of land 35 years down the road. They made a small change a couple years later where they tracked how many miles you traveled. Every 20 miles you traveled could get you 1 extra day of service.
Wait, how many miles you traveled while you were in service?
Yeah, and if you look at the service record, sometimes there's right in the service records, there's a thing that says distant traveled, 86 miles. And you're like, that's random. Why is that in there? But
wow.
Because they were saying for that 80 miles you traveled, 4 days of service, which some of these guys were right on the threshold of these tiers here.
Yeah.
Those extra days could bump them up to
get bump them up. Nice.
Yep. Yes.
Love that. Widows and minors.
Yes, for these bounty land acts, the widows could apply if the soldier had already died, and the minor children. But if it's only adult children that are left, like if the husband and wife are both gone, the adult children were not eligible. If your soldier and his wife both died before 1850, there's probably not going to be bounty land for these soldiers.
Okay.
Keep that in mind.
Okay. You would think, if it took so long for them to get the bounty land, unless they got a young chick. I don't know.
You don't find a whole lot of minor children, but like you said, it happened. So
it does happen. They were probably pretty attractive still,
I know you. Yeah.
All right. 1855.
Yeah. So when I talk, if you've heard me talk about bounty land before, anybody, you know that one of my favorite analogies for this is, of all things, trick or treating. All right. So if you are getting ready to do trick or treating and you bought like 4 bags of candy, the beginning of the night, you're going to be giving 1 or 2 pieces of candy to each kid that come to the door. As the night goes on, let's say trick or treating ends at 8 o'clock and it's 7:45 at night.
Uh-huh.
You have 2 bags of candy left. If you're like me, I'd be tempted to eat all that, so I want to give it away as much as I can. I don't have it sitting around.
So you go handfuls.
Yes, I've done it. So as the night goes on, let's say you're getting near the end of trick-or-treating night, you're going to be a lot more generous by giving that candy out. You're going to be giving it away by the handful. And that's what I compare this next Bounty Land Act to. Bounty Land Act of 1855. Because under the Act of 1850, you had to serve at least 30 days and you would get 40 acres. But look at that top line there. In 1855, they said, well, as long as you served 14 days, we're going to give you 160 acres. They started giving out that bounty land like trick-or-treating candy.
Wow.
They really got a lot more generous 5 years later.
Wow.
Yeah. So these soldiers really made out pretty well. By only doing 2 weeks of service, they got bumped up to 160 acres instead.
Wowza. Yes,
Yeah.
that is definitely incentive. Okay.
Yes.
So knowing the laws, you're saying those are probably like the most important laws to know.
Yes.
All right.
Yep.
And if we were so inclined, where would we go to find out more about the laws?
There's a book. Christine Rose has a book, Military Bounty Land, that you can read about. That's where she spells it out pretty well in there. So
go, Christine. I miss her so much. I
Yep.
miss her so much. All right, step 2.
All right.
The bounty land application. So
exactly. Yes.
how do we do this and what will it tell us?
Okay. So the bounty land application is a little complicated to find because it could be in more than one place.
Okay.
If your soldier got a pension later in life in the 1870s, that bounty land application will be filed within that pension. Okay. But if he did not get a pension, it's going to be a separate record group at the National Archives. There's a bounty line index on fold 3 that goes A through L, but it stops there because COVID hit and it stopped the project. And I haven't seen him continue it yet. But even if it's not indexed, in order to get that bounty land, they would still have to apply. So even if it's not indexed, it's still going to exist. So I have an image of one of the indexes that you can find on fold 3. We're going to be looking at a soldier named Jacob Carson because he applied for land and he ended up getting it. And I'm going to show you his application and his warrant and all the fun stuff that comes along with this. So if you go to fold 3, it's got the document number right on there. And if you go to the next screen, I'm going to show you, if you go to the National Archives and request the bounty land application for Jacob Carson, this is what you get. It's actually a whole packet.
It's beautiful.
10 to 12 pages. But I cropped one paragraph on here because these are especially valuable for genealogy if it was a widow applying on behalf of the soldier. Because she was going to have to prove that the soldier died and that she was even married to him in the first place. So if you look at this, she's stating Jacob Carson was married in Bristol, Pennsylvania in May of 1818. May of 1818, a marriage record from that time period is very difficult to find.
I was going to say, how does she prove marriage?
Well, a lot of times it's just affidavits. There's another affidavit in here from someone who was familiar with the family, and they accepted that as proof. So you get people who knew the family, you get the date of the marriage, where it was located. And she even talks in there that her husband died December of 1820, and she is still a widow. So genealogically speaking, these vital records don't exist in a lot of other places, except for possibly in these bounty line applications.
This is gold.
Yes, and you got the name of the witnesses. Those are people who knew your family. And if you like to collect your ancestor's signature, she signed that document right there at the bottom. It says Sarah Carson.
Sarah Carson.
Yeah.
Very nice.
So it's definitely worth getting the bounty land application if your ancestor got bounty land.
Okay. Are we moving on to a step or a record?
Let's move on. The next step would be, We got a little ahead of ourselves, didn't we?
Bounty.
Step
We're
2
still
is
on
to
bounty
get the
land. Is there
application.
more? Sorry.
Yep. The next step would be to find the warrant, right?
All right. So step
All right.
3 is to find the warrant.
All right. So if your ancestor applied for bounty land and they got accepted, approved, they would then be issued a bounty land warrant.
And how
You
long
can
did that
find-
take? Was it a quick process or just depended on what they had to verify, like marriage?
Exactly. It would depend on what they had to verify. Sometimes they would need more information. They would do it a little bit of investigation to prove that they weren't being fraudulent. Things moved pretty slowly back then, so it could take a while to do. It wasn't like instantly within a week you had your land.
And they would have depositions and stuff in there similar to a Civil War.
Not often. These bounty land applications are typically pretty small. You get 4, 5, 6 pages of like affidavits,
Okay.
explanation of service.
Okay.
I don't see very big packets of them very often.
100-page pension packets. Okay.
No, it's not going to be like that, but it's still really good. What's in there is pretty good.
Okay. Okay. So we're going to find the warrant. Let us share that on the screen. I'll move to the next slide as soon as it comes up.
So the warrants are indexed on the Bureau of Land Management Index on the website there.
Okay, so you go to the BLM and you search
Go to
for
the
your
BLM
person.
index. If you just Google, BLM index, it should bring this site up. If you type in Jacob Carson, we're going to be looking to find his warrant on this index.
Okay.
He applied for it. They were approved. Technically, she applied for it because she was widowed. She was approved, so we're going to find the military bounty warrant. The way you can do that, I had it circled on there, was the MW at the beginning. Stands for military warrant.
Oops, sorry.
That's all right. The MW circled stands for military warrant. That's how you know you're looking at bounty land. If you click on it, it's going to show you some information here about that bounty land warrant. And it's one thing is, if you see on there, says that she got 40 acres, which is part of what that Bounty Land Act said. One thing that really throws people off, though, is the fact that this says the land was in Iowa. And people get really confused by that because they're like, okay, my ancestor was from Pennsylvania. They always lived in Pennsylvania. They never moved to Iowa. This can't be my ancestor.
Okay, so they weren't giving you land in your backyard.
They weren't. No, they had to be claim the land in a federal land state. So Pennsylvania was not one. A lot of it was west of the Mississippi, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, that area. But the thing is, this was the 1850s. Soldiers and their widows were getting to be around 60 years old, if not older by this point. They did not want to start over, move out west, resettle somewhere. They didn't even necessarily have the money to pick up and move. So a lot of them never even stepped foot on their bounty land.
Wow.
They sold it off right away.
Wow.
So people get confused by that all the time, but don't let it throw you off.
Okay, so if you see
they never
someplace
even
out
stepped
west, it could still be yours. Just look what they're with. You could tell that this was them because the wife, and is it common for the wife to be on there? It would always be the wife and the husband.
Yes, she's on there because she was the widow. If Jacob was still alive,
she wouldn't be on there.
Applying on his own behalf, and it would be just his name on there.
Got you. Okay.
But that extra name on there, it said Frederick Jessup. He's the one that ended up with the land. He's the one that bought this land from Sarah Carson. And he's the one that went to Iowa, not Sarah. Okay. She pocketed the money. That's what most soldiers did, is they just pocketed the money and moved on.
That's a nice pocket of money.
It is, yeah.
I bet people set up businesses just to suss this out. And
yes, there were land speculators that were buying these up and selling them for a profit. Definitely.
Fantastic. All right. Is there anything in the packet that shows this sale of land, or would that be in the county of where the land was?
Yeah, it would. Actually, the next screen, if you shows the actual certificate that you're going to get from the National Archives.
This is beautiful.
It is a nice, big, colorful certificate that you can get from the archives. Very elaborate design. That's pretty elaborate for the 1850s.
Yes.
My thought is they didn't want them counterfeited. I've never heard an official explanation, but that's the one that makes sense to me, is they didn't want these counterfeited. That would be really hard to counterfeit that. So these warrants acted as a voucher, kind of like a gift certificate that you could take to the land office and redeem for your 40 acres.
Okay.
You asked about the sale of that land. On the back side of that, it actually shows, and I have an image of that, a little bit of the cropped backside of that warrant that shows that Sarah Carson is assigning that to Frederick
Oh,
Jessup.
wow.
And she also signed that when she had this paper in her hands at one point and signed it. So that's kind of cool as well.
So to get this paperwork, you're ordering it from the National Archives?
That's right. You have to order these, the applications and the warrants, all that from the National Archives. That's right.
Okay. And so you have a step 4, which is quite interesting, is to
Yes.
find, is there a second warrant? Now, why
Yes, you
would
need to
there
keep
be a
going.
second one?
Remember that Halloween candy analogy?
Oh.
If you went to someone's house and you only got one piece of candy at the beginning of the night and your buddy comes up and says, that lady down the street just gave me 10 pieces of candy, guess where you're going next?
I'm going back.
You're going back to get the rest of your candy. That's what a lot of these soldiers did when the next Bounty Land Act was passed in 1855. These people that only got 40 or 80 acres, they went back and got the rest of their Halloween candy and said, I want 160 total. So
Nice.
if you find a 40 acre or 80 acre at first, you need to go back and check because most likely they went back and reapplied and got bumped up again.
If the veteran passed, could the widow have applied?
Yep. Yep. If the soldier died in between the first and the second one,
Yeah.
you're going to find the widow applying for the second one. Yep.
Yes. And is this as you have
Yes. Jacob Carson again. If you look on this one, sure enough, it's for 120 acres. You can see on there. She sold this one to Henry Whitney, and he went to Kansas to claim it. And I have the certificate that shows that she went back and got the rest of her 120 acres right there. So she did what a lot of people did. They went back and got the rest of it.
I love it. I
Yes.
love it. That is great. These are beautiful.
They are. Those are
how
really
big
nice.
are they?
What's that?
Are they like tiny or like how
No,
big
they're
are
about the size of roughly the size of like notebook paper, 8x11.
Oh,
They're a little bit bigger than that, but I mean that's roughly the size of it at least.
very nice.
Yeah.
So you find out about the second warrant. The information on there is just basically the land description.
Yes, it'll tell where exactly that land was claimed, what township, what range, all of that. If you want to really go pretty deep into it to find out who claimed it and where it was, that's all going to be on there.
That's pretty. Your ancestor could like have like a shopping center in Iowa somewhere. Like it could be a shopping mall on your ancestor's property.
Yes.
All right. So you find that second warrant and you move on to step 5, which is to locate the patent. So what's a patent? How's that different from a warrant?
Right. So the process was they would apply for the bounty land. If they were approved, they would get the warrant. When they went to redeem the warrant, whoever it was, they would get the patent. A patent is a similar concept to like a land deed. A lot of us are familiar with that. A patent, it just is the first owner of that land.
Mm-hmm.
The federal government owned it first. Then it went to this soldier or the person that actually claimed the land from the soldier. So they would get the patent. Any transactions after that point were deeds at the county level.
Okay. So patents are transfers of land to the first land owner.
Yes, it's similar to the land deed. And you can actually go on that Bureau of Land Management site. There's an image, there's a thing on there that says patent image. If you click on there, it's going to bring up a copy of the patent. This is not the original patent. The original patent would have been in the hands of the person that settled the land. But this was a copy, like a transcription, that was put into a patent book, and they digitized most, if not all of them, and put them on the Bureau of Land Management website.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's some kind of interesting stuff on there. It kind of summarizes the whole process. But there's one thing, the very last image I have, I want to just make one quick point.
Oh, sure.
Because it says on there, why don't we keep going to the last image I had on there?
One more.
I think it's probably 2 more. 1 more. There we go. So it says Henry Whitney was the assignee, and it says, I, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States of America. What is he doing on there? This throws people off a lot because they think, and I've heard this, and I'm going to break somebody's heart tonight, I'm sure.
Oh,
You do not have a document that's signed by the President of the United States.
okay.
For 2 reasons. One of them is this is a copy of the original. So even if he had signed the original,
Yeah.
this is not the original.
Okay.
But Abraham Lincoln had better things to do in 1862 than federal land patents. We were
Are
in the
you
middle of a civil
sure?
war.
Are you sure, Brian?
I would think so. I
My
would think so.
ancestor. Come on, Brian.
I knew I had to bring the Civil War into this somehow, right?
Yes, thank
So-
you. Thank you. Thank you.
So the law said that a secretary could sign off on the original one as well. So I hear from people all the time who are excited they have a document signed by the president. And I'm sorry, but you probably don't. But
oh, I
yeah,
think people should think about that with sports athletes too. I've heard of siblings because the person is tired of writing, siblings kind of doing it for them. So yeah,
yeah, why
you
not?
never know.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
that was
let's
the quick overview of Bounty Land. Very quick, but
So it was beautiful. It was beautiful. Do you guys have any questions for Brian? Let's look at the final step, which of course is to document your
Oh, yeah.
findings.
and I forgot this one because this is something that I am very bad at is I do all this work and then I'm like, that's cool. And I close my computer and walk away. Didn't document anything. So this is on there as a reminder to me to document what you found because you might have a hard time finding it again.
So Brian, as a military specialist and a genealogist, how do you document your findings?
I do a lot of digitizing of the images. I will put them within my family tree or my folders within my computer where I have my different ancestors' names. And as I get documents, I put them in there.
So you have a folder for each ancestor and you put your documents in there for them.
In theory, I do. I'm not always good about doing it, but I do have folders for each of my ancestors and I do have documents in there. So if I was following my own rules, that's what I would be doing is putting those documents in those folders. And of course, if you can write up a little summary of what you found and what happened in the process of they applied on this date and were granted the land, they assigned it to this person. And that would be a great way to save it for future generations as well.
Yes, we have to save this stuff. Yes, we're spending a lot of money doing this stuff. Let's save it. And let's look at these wonderful steps, Brian, for digging up War of 1812 bounty land. Step 1, know the laws. Step 2, locate the bounty land application. Step 3, find the land warrant. Step 4, is there a second land warrant? Get that extra 120 acres. Step 5, locate the patent. And step 6, most definitely document your findings. And please take a look at Brian's site, civilwarrecords.com. You can go there. He will retrieve some records for you. And also, I don't know if you know this, but our blog is up and running at genealogyquickstart.com. Please go and take a look. Brian, this was amazing. Thank you so much. Let me add our buddies back on. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We so appreciate you. Bounty land warrants aren't given. Wait. Oh, I'm going to have, let me see. Everyone says thank you. So bounty land warrants weren't given to War of 18. Hold on. I want to see what she says without running out of time. Hold on. Is it coming? Yeah. So bounty land warrants weren't given to War of 18 until 1850. Is that true, Brian?
For the most part, there was a Bounty Land Act that was passed in 1812 that applied only to the regular army. The vast majority of soldiers were not in the regular army, but it's worth checking to see. Maybe he's one of the small number that qualified in 1812.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Brian. Do not drop. Everyone, go find your War of 1812 soldier. They might have been impersonated by Jim Beidler's ancestor. Bye.